It was, without a doubt, the largest empire in all of human history, a global superpower that literally redrew the map of the world and shaped so much of the life we know today. So how on earth did a small island nation manage to rule a quarter of the entire globe? And just as importantly, what led to its pretty dramatic collapse? Let's get into the epic story of the British Empire. Okay, just take a look at this map. This is the empire at its absolute peak, right after World War I. We're talking over 13 million square miles. I mean, the scale is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Think about it for a second. From the massive landscapes of Canada to the coasts of Australia, from the heart of India all the way to the shores of Nigeria, every single one of those places was under the control of this one power. And because it was so huge, spanning the entire globe, it gave rise to that famous kind of boastful phrase, the empire on which the sun never sets. And you know what? It was literally true. Because its territories were scattered across every single time zone, daylight was always shining on some part of the British Empire. But this wasn't just about land, not at all. It was about people. By 1922, the empire ruled over 458 million individuals. That's about 1/5 of the entire world's population at the time. Just a staggering number of lives, all connected, one way or another, to the single imperial power. So where did this all even begin? Well, we have to go way back to the origins. The story of what historians call the First British Empire is really a story of playing catch-up. See, back in the 15th and 16th centuries, Spain and Portugal were the big players. They were the dominant colonial powers, getting incredibly rich from their empires. And, well, England was looking on, getting pretty envious and deciding it wanted a piece of the action. The real groundwork was laid during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. She gave the green light to privateers. We're talking about state-sponsored pirates, basically, like the famous Sir Francis Drake, to go out and raid Spanish ships and ports. It was a clever strategy. Prey on your rival's wealth while you start pushing to build an empire of your own. And this gets us to the really brutal economic engine of the early empire. Yeah, it started with exploration, but the real money, the serious wealth, was generated in the Caribbean. Sugar plantations on islands like Jamaica became the most profitable parts of the whole enterprise, and they were built entirely on the horrific foundation of enslaved African labor. At the same time, another big project was taking shape over in North America, the 13 Colonies. Now, they weren't as immediately profitable as the Caribbean sugar islands, not by a long shot. But they attracted huge numbers of English settlers, people looking for land or religious freedom, and eventually they became Britain's most populous territories overseas. But then, it all came to a very dramatic end. After years of simmering tensions over things like taxes and control, the American War of Independence finally broke out. This painting right here, the surrender at Yorktown, this captures the decisive moment. The loss of the American colonies in 1783 was a massive blow. It marked the end of that first British Empire and forced Britain to make a major pivot in its whole imperial strategy.
So you might think losing America would be the end of it, but no. It didn't end Britain's imperial ambitions. It just redirected them. Britain shifted its focus towards Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. And in doing so, it entered what's called its imperial century, a period of just unparalleled global dominance that would define the Second British Empire.
The one event that really kicked off this whole new era was the final defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815. With its main rival, France, finally out of the picture, Britain was left as the world's #1 power, completely unrivaled on the seas. This period of dominance actually gets a name, the Pax Britannica, which is Latin for British peace. With its incredibly powerful Royal Navy, Britain effectively controlled the world's oceans. It protected its massive network of trade routes and basically acted as a self-appointed global policeman. And this whole era was powered by new technology, the steamship and the telegraph. I mean, these didn't just speed up travel and communication, they fundamentally changed how you could control a global empire. This huge network was physically connected by undersea telegraph cables, sometimes called the All-Red Line, which let London manage its sprawling possessions with a speed that was just unimaginable before. Now, at the very heart of this Second Empire was India. After it came under direct British rule, it became known as the Jewel and the Crown. Why? Because it was the empire's most valuable and most populous possession. It provided immense wealth and military manpower, a status that was symbolized when Prime Minister Disraeli had Queen Victoria declared its empress. But, as we all know, no empire lasts forever. And in the 20th century, the cracks really started to show. The decline was sped up by two absolutely devastating world wars. And, crucially, the rise of powerful anti-colonial movements all across the globe.
You really can't overstate the impact of the two world wars. They were an absolute turning point. Britain went from being the world's industrial and financial powerhouse before World War I to being pretty much bankrupt by the end of World War II. It was so bad, they had to take a massive loan from the United States in 1945 just to stay afloat. So, after World War II, a wind of change, as it was called, swept across the globe. The empire was financially crippled and just couldn't sustain itself anymore, and the pace of decolonization just exploded. It started with the huge moment of independence for India and Pakistan in 1947. And then over the next few decades, look at this, dozens of nations across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean followed. If there was one single moment that really exposed how much things had changed, it was the Suez Crisis in 1956. Britain tried to use military force to take back the Suez Canal from Egypt, but it was forced into a humiliating withdrawal because of pressure from the United States. It was a stark wake-up call that showed Britain was no longer a top-tier global power and couldn't act alone without America's approval.
The whole process of decolonization pretty much wrapped up in the 20th century. And for many people, this moment right here, the transfer of Hong Kong back to China in 1997, was the final symbolic end of the British Empire. But even after all the flags came down and the maps were redrawn, the empire left this deep and lasting mark on the world. So, to finish up, let's take a look at its really complex and often controversial legacy. You know, the empire's inheritance is a real study in contrasts. On one hand, it spread things like parliamentary democracy and systems of common law, not to mention cultural things like the English language and sports like cricket and football. But on the other hand, its legacy is one of deep division. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial officials have fueled ethnic and religious conflicts that are still going on today, and the tensions from colonial rules still echo in so many of its former territories. And believe it or not, the story isn't completely over. Today, Britain still has sovereignty over 14 overseas territories. They're the last scattered remnants of this once global empire, from the Caribbean all the way down to the South Atlantic. And all of this leads us to our final, and I think most crucial question. The formal empire might be gone, but its influence is still all around us. It's in our language, our laws, our politics, even the lines on the map. So I'll leave you with this to think about. How do you see the echoes of empire continuing to shape our world today?